Good day, everybody. Welcome to Lab 2. All right, so let's just dive right in. So we finished Lab 1 by this point, meaning that, of course, our Pi is on the network. Everything's good to go. So we're going to start. If you look at the lab, there's a link at the end, basically giving you a tutorial. I do not want you to follow the tutorial. The tutorial reference is just there to have some sort of text reference to basically what we're doing. Follow along. I will release a text file of some sort as a companion, so you have something to copy and paste from. That being said, though, as long as you follow along, you might not necessarily even need that. All right. So when we go to a tutorial for the Raspberry Pi, the first thing that we're going to see is it's going to give us what we did in Lab 1. So we can skip this. And keep in mind, right, like this is going to be in just about every tutorial. If you come upon one that maybe you were looking for outside of the purposes of class, I do not recommend that you constantly reinstall Raspbian because, of course, every time you do that, you are starting from scratch. So, step 1. Let's open up. Step 1. Installing Nginx, or Nginx, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So, in the previous semester, we had installed Apache on our Pi. That will cause a problem. Apache and Nginx both bind to port 80. There are two solutions. One is to stop Apache and disable it, then install Nginx. The other, of course, to be remove Apache and then install Nginx. We're going to go with the first one since we're not going to be using both. So to do that, and you can do this even if you don't think you have Apache installed, it's not going to hurt. I'll switch over to our SSH, or a terminal window running within the VNC interface. I'm going to type in sudo apt remove purge. And don't worry if you didn't do this with me, it's fine. Apache 2 star. So that's going to go through and attempt to remove Apache. I do not have Apache installed. I'm all good. If I did have it installed, it might ask me if I want to remove it, yes or no. If that was the case, I would click yes, or sorry, type yes, I guess, for that case. So before we begin, let's do an update just to make sure that our repositories are fresh. Now remember, a repository is simply just a collection of versions. So it's telling me I currently have things I can upgrade. If we're doing this from home, now would be a great time. You can check what's upgradable there. So quite a lot of things on this Pi are upgradable. I'm going to go ahead and skip that for this moment. I'll do that later, of course, when I'm not taking up your time. All right. So we've done that. Now we're going to install Nginx. And it's quite simply as easy as doing this. Now I'm going to put the Y flag here. What that means is essentially it's not going to ask me that yes or no question that it might have done if you uninstalled Apache. It's just going to assume that I mean yes. This is also known as unattended. All right, here we go. Now it's setting it up. Perfect. All right, Nginx is installed. If I want to confirm it is installed, I can type in systemctl, short for system control, status, Nginx. I could also type in nginx.status, but if it is, in most situations, that's omittable. All right, so I see that I'm active green here, and that's a fairly good indication. If I was red for some reason, these lines down here would give me a message, basically a hint on where to look in my diagnostic steps. So on the Pi, you're currently in a text window. There are two ways to get out of that. You can press Q or you can press Control C. Q is unique to this situation. It's not always an option. Control C is generally good to get you out of anything. So in this situation, I'll type Q. Perfect. All right, so that was it. You installed Nginx. You've got a highly scalable, starting a high performance web server and reverse proxy. What's next? Okay, we're going to install MariaDB. So I won't get too much into the history. You can look in on that. MariaDB is a fork of MySQL that's maintained by the original authors of MySQL before Oracle purchased them. That is all you need to know. But just like last step, let's see here. So we got step 2, installing MariaDB. We will want to remove MySQL just in case we do have that installed. So in order to do that, and again, remember, if you don't know, it's better to be on the safe side and just go follow along. Sudo apt remove MySQL star purge. So I do not have MySQL installed. We are good. So what's first? Let's go see the commands over here. Let's remove our MySQL step is finished. And we're going to install MariaDB. You'll notice I am taking the apt-get commands, copy and paste. They have the Y, so they have the unattended. One thing to note, apt and apt-get are interchangeable in most versions that are based off Debian anyway. All right, let's go put that in our terminal. Now, depending on your connection speed, this might not necessarily go as fast as it's going for me, but it should be fairly quick. So what you're seeing is it unpacking MariaDB. Now, of course, if MariaDB depends on other programs or libraries, such as, in this instance, libdbi-perl, libreadline, etc., apt in the background is what's saying, okay, well, we want MariaDB, but to have MariaDB, we also need X, Y, and Z, therefore we will install those. X, Y, and Z, furthermore, might have dependencies, so you can see the need for a package manager. Quite uneventful. And here we go. So obviously step 1 is procure said files from the internet. Step 2 is unpack and set up. So if you're wondering what a trigger is, during an installation process, there might be a specific order things need to happen. Since multiple things are being installed at once, they all have to basically be normalized in the sense that they have certain hooks where you can say, for example, after install or after network install, do this, do this, do this. So all of these programs give hooks to these triggers, and apt runs these triggers in order. Example of a trigger might be stop the service before we upgrade it, and then restart it after we are done. So we're creating symlinks here. You'll see these are our services, right? So when we use system control or system CTL, essentially these are the things we're concerned of. Now, what a system link is, or a symbolic link, sorry, is basically a reference from one file to another. They're both the same file. If you edit one, you're just editing another. If we think back to programming, it's basically like passing by reference. Perfect. So again, we want to test to make sure that we are in fact good. So we will go over to our terminal and we will type in system control status. Now we have a service. We have options here, right? Because MySQL and MySQLD are symlinks of each other, and they're both symlinks of MariaDB. Or I should say both of them are symlinks of MariaDB. So we can go MariaDB. We should be seeing green. Press Q to get out. Again, since they're symlinks, MySQL and MySQLD. All right, so that thus concludes step 2. What is step 3? Step 3 is installing PHP 7 on a Raspbian Stretch Lite. So disregard this. It's installing PHP 7 on my Raspbian. Raspbian Stretch, to be a little bit more specific. Whether it's light or not light, it doesn't matter. So we're going to go, I'm going to take that, head over to my terminal, and put that in. Oh, I can see I have a copy and paste error because my line's ending with a minus. So what I forgot to copy was the Y, I believe. Yes, there we go. It's very important that we do put things in exact. Creating our symlinks. Creating configuration files. In this situation here, it's creating new configuration files. There's no conflicts. Sometimes it might want to upgrade a configuration file, in which case it will prompt you. The default option, if you do not know what you're doing, is to keep the current version that you have, especially if you've done any kind of modifications to it. If you haven't done any modifications, then you could take the newest version. I mean, you won't necessarily hurt anything, but definitely with modifications, always keep the default. This is just some of the mods available. So mods, short for modules. EXIF data, things you get from photos, FTP, file info. That is a PHP assembly runtime file. WebSockets, MySQL, of course. Opcache for caching. Native API for reading JSON. And we're good. So, I'm sure we know what we need to do next. So it's PHP 7FPM. You'll notice I mashed a key there. So if I type PHP and I hit tab twice, I'll get autocomplete options. If there are many autocomplete options, it'll give me a list. However, if I narrow it down to there only being one, it will autocomplete. Perfect. PHP is recorded. Or sorry, installed. Of course, with that, we also installed PHP 7FPM, the Fast Process Manager. And let's see here, step 4. What do we got? We're going to get a copy of WordPress, but we're going to do it in a special directory. All right, so I want you to cd var www. do an ls to get the directory structure. We have one file in there, or one directory, I should say. Do an ls minus L to get a listing, or a long listing. So we can tell right here are the permissions of this particular folder. Owner, group, and date of creation. We are concerned with these two. So HTML at the moment is owned by root. If I do a ps minus aux and I do a grep Nginx, and don't worry, you do not have to do that, I'll see that the Nginx or Nginx daemon is currently running as www.data. That is its user account that it's running under. So I'm going to sudo chown www.data www.data star flag with a capital R for recursive to go through subdirectories. Perfect. Do an ls minus L. Now everything's owned by data again. So let's get to our step here. It wants us to get a file. So it wants us to get the latest version of WordPress. So let's do that. We're using wget to do that. Wget, short for webget, is just a CLI utility for grabbing resources via various protocols. I believe it's built on top of something called curl. All right, so now we have that. We're going to sudo tar zxvf latest.tar.gz. So tar is an archive. GZ is a compression type, gzip. Z is to uncompress, X is to extract, V is to be verbose about it, and F is to force. So if there was any files, it would override. And then, of course, that's the archive we are trying to extract. We'll see a bunch of files fly by. That's the verbose option going, just showing us what exactly is going on. So I'm going to do an ls again. There we go. So I want to clean up after myself. We've got a new directory called WordPress. I'm going to remove the latest.tar.gz. So sudo rm latest.tar.gz. Excellent. Now, WordPress is probably going to be owned by root. Oh, it's owned by nobody, no group. All right, well, I mean, not terrible, but we can do better. So if we go back, and remember, I'm pressing up and down to go through my history. If we go back, we can get to our chown commands. Run that again. Excellent. So now we have this directory WordPress, and it's installed in our web root folder. So all in all, I think we can say we are finished this step. And let's reflect here. So step 4. Getting the most recent copy of WordPress and extracting it in web root. And let's pretty that a little bit. Making sure the permissions match to the owner of the web server process. Excellent. What is next? Okay, so it wants us to configure the Nginx, configuring Nginx to the proxy HTTP request to the PHP7 fast CGI manager. This sounds a lot more complicated than it needs to. I do recommend at some point in your career that you do take a nice gander at all of the things that you can do in here. But generally, you learn them as you need to, so don't be overly stressed about it. All right, so I've actually gone ahead and put a file on a CDN, on my CDN. So we'll call that wordpress.com. So I'm just going to take this address here. Copy that. Switch over to my terminal. And I'm going to cd /etc/Nginx sites minus available. Do an ls. Awesome. So we used wget previously. Let's use it again. Sudo wget. I'm going to paste that web address. Excellent. So now I have this file called wordpress.conf. I'm going to sudo nano wordpress.com. And everything is taken care of for me. We did go a little bit more detail of this in class, but since we have this file now, we don't need to do that. All you really should know is listen 80 means listen on port 80. This is the default server. We'll expand on this later. The server name is an underscore to also signify it's the default server. And our web root, the one that we just created with the WordPress site, is var www.wordpress. Remember, it's Control X to get out of Nano. Okay, so we're gonna cd ... Actually, no, let's do this absolute. etc Nginx sites enabled. Okay. So I see default there. I want to sudo rm default. Actually, before we do that, let's type in ln or ls -l. So we'll notice default is a symbolic link to the sites available default file. When we delete this, we're just deleting the link. We're not actually deleting the file. So sudo rm default, it's gone. Now we're going to create a new link. So sudo ln, which is link -s for symbolic. We start with the source, etc Nginx sites available wordpress.com. And then we use the destination, etc Nginx sites enabled. Now, if it's going to be the same file name, you can leave it at that point right there where it's just the destination directory. You can actually specify the full file path, of course. The links don't have to be the same file name. Do an ls -l. All right, so I have this wordpress.com file there now. So let's see here. I should be good to restart Nginx. So if I go sudo system control restart Nginx, and you notice this time we're using sudo, that's because we're actually modifying the service. We're not just getting the status of it. Excellent. If something had gone wrong, it would have reported an error, in which case we could have used system control status Nginx to try to figure out what that error was. But luckily we did not. Just gonna get my IP here. It's perfect. And then we'll switch over. All right, so if I go to my IP in a web browser, I do get the welcome to WordPress. So we could say that step 5, it was configuring, I never know how to write it, Nginx or Nginx to use the WordPress site. As a step, we removed the original default, created a symbolic link, perfect. Let's see what we got here. All right, so creating a MariaDB user and database. Now, we have not done this in class. This is the first section, I believe, was a little bit before the second and the third, but the second and the third definitely finished here. So let's switch over to our console. First thing we want to do is enter the MariaDB or MySQL or whatever you want to call it. Remember, they're synonymous for each other in this situation as far as what you know. So we will sudo MariaDB to get into the console. Because we're using sudo, we don't have to give the database root password. And that'll actually just drop us right into the console. So we want to create a database, and we've learned, or you've learned, we've all learned at some point to do that using create database, and we'll call it WordPress. Excellent. So we've created our WordPress database. Next, we're going to create a user to use in our WordPress database, or that controls our WordPress database. So remember, it's create user, and we'll say a user at localhost identified by password. We'll keep it very, very generic. I don't recommend ever doing this in production, but for the sake of this lab, it's more than okay. All right, we've done that. Now, finally, we want to grant roles or access. So if we go take the boilerplate, remember we are, bear with me. We need to change that now to user. And that to WordPress. Excellent. Okay, so that is actually it for the database portion of it. We can go ahead and go exit. Now, let's go back to our... We call that preparing a schema for a web application. And essentially, whether it be WordPress or anything else, it's generally going to be exactly like that. You're just creating a blank schema. The application itself is actually going to bootstrap everything else. The only thing it can't bootstrap is the creation of a user in a database or a schema, just because, I mean, it doesn't have that kind of access to the database server. So that's a process that we do manually. And step 7, we'll call it server optimization. All right, so since WordPress suggested that we should have the CGI fixed path info equals 0 in PHPFPM, the next step is essentially to do that. And that is as simple as just editing a configuration file. So we'll go back to our SSH window. We will type in sudo nano /etc/php/7.0/fpm for fast process manager /php.ini. If we use Control W, we'll get a search. So it wants us to switch. It basically wants us to uncomment a line. So we know what we're looking for. We're looking basically for that. So I'll copy that, paste that into that, press enter, and here we are at that line. Now remember, this is a description, not the first line. Do not uncomment the first line. And then this is the actual line we're looking for here. So I will uncomment by just removing that character. Control X to get out. Yes to save. Enter to save as the same file. And it wants me now to restart the PHP fast process manager. Bear with me. Okay, no errors reported, so that worked. All right, so let's back to a window over here. And we'll Step 8 is WordPress configuration. And going back to the code, actually, let's take a look together first. So with the MariaDB user and database instance in place, which we have done, the next thing that we do is create a WordPress configuration so WordPress can actually use that. Now WordPress is very nice and provides us a sample. So if we go back to our window and we go cd, remember our web root, var www, and of course it was WordPress. We do an ls, and we'll actually see WordPress config.sample. So what we need to do is just copy that file using cp WordPress config, wp conf, and we want to now call it, we just want to get rid of the sample and the lost minus sign there. Excellent. Permission denied because I'm not that user, so we'll do sudo. Perfect. I'm in the habit of always changing file permissions back, so ch own www data. Excellent. The reason the file permission changed, right, is once we edit it with sudo, since we're editing as root, root becomes the owner since we're overwriting the file. So we're going to nano it, sudo nano wconfig.php. So MySQL settings, you can get this from your web host, or in which case you can get this from the lab we just did. We called the database WordPress. We called the user. We called the password. Database host is the IP address of the database or host name of the database that we're referring to. We're going to use the loopback or localhost, and that's fine. We don't need to change this. Now it's going to ask us for some unique phrases. So this is for cryptography. Basically, it uses these keys to make random number generation a little bit more unique. So you can enter something meaningful, or you can just enter in gibberish. Realistically, your gibberish will probably be more unique than anything original that you can think of. One thing to note, when you log into, let's say, a website and asks you the whole remember me thing, right? When you don't have to relog in every time you go there. If I were to change one of these keys while the application is running, it will invalidate everybody's login hashes, and I will basically be signing all my users out. So set this to something secure the first time. Come back down. We don't need to change that. Don't need to change that. And we don't need to change that. Okay, well, we're done. Control X and Y and enter. So that takes care of the WordPress configuration. What is step 9? All right, so we do this down the road. What you need to know here, if you're reading along, is yes, you can have fake host names to resolve websites back. But since we are running it as the default website, we are good. All right, so now it wants us to run the WordPress installation script. So to do that, we'll go over to our WordPress, and it actually brings us, when we first log into WordPress, it realizes that it's not set up, and it by default brings us to it. So that's why we have the wp-admin setup config.php. So English, continue. Oh, I guess we didn't necessarily need to nano the file. What if I... Okay, there we go. So if you need to reload, you might just need to press F5 there. I guess you can technically do this all through the UI, which makes sense. So site title, we'll call it Dave's WordPress site. Dave. Pass. It wants me to confirm the use of a weak password. It's getting smart. Dave@Dave.Dave. Perfect. And maybe let's not have search engines search this. Well, at least discourage them. And I'm going to click install WordPress. You'll know it's doing stuff where it says waiting for, and you see some sort of network activity. Things are spinning. So remember that basically it's running scripts on the SSH side. Maybe I can. So if I go look at my CPU usage, kind of saw the tail end of it there, but PHP was using quite a bit. I think something like 70%. So it is finished. If I go back here, success, WordPress has been installed. Thank you and enjoy. So I'm going to log in, and it's Dave@Dave.Dave and a password test. Aw. I guess it's just Dave. It's not Dave. Did I already break my... Well, don't do what Dave did. I'm sure I'll figure it out by watching this over. But that concludes that step. All right, so going back, and I think that's actually where we leave off here. Yeah, so further enhancements. If you want to look at the article, there are some additional things you can do, such as increasing the default file size. That's done through both Nginx has a default or Nginx has a default, as does PHP. SMTP is if you want to set up some sort of mail. I don't recommend doing that on a Pi. Let's Encrypt, if you were running this as a server, let's say, and it wasn't constantly being ported around, you can go ahead and put a free SSL certificate on it. And he goes into that in detail, as well as actually showing you how to do the Nginx config. Now, that's something that I think we'll definitely go over in the security course. But if you are jumping the gun and you're setting up web servers on your own before then, better safe and secure first. So absolutely give this a read. Updating WordPress to a new URL. Okay, so again, he does this after he set up HTTPS, and what he's doing is basically, you'll see he's going into the database and he's just replacing HTTP for HTTPS. Cleaning up. All right, that concludes that. All right, so I hope that was simple enough. Thank you for watching.